The content you're about to hear may be graphic in nature. Listener discretion is advised.
Oh, how I wonder what it's like to relax. See the sky down under. Hope my plans collapse. Oh, how I'm under the surface of my tears, falling down asunder the meaning of my years.
This is True Crime XS.
I usually would not break up an episode where we're talking about something and insert true crime news in it, but I am doing that because we were talking about something that we sort of came to not a conclusion, but we ended an episode on. And today I wanted to put a piece of true crime news in and then finish out what was going on with that episode, because there are some interesting things happening that these cases share in common. If you want to read more about this one, the place that I originally saw pop on it was the Vidocq Society, but they were linking back to what's literally truecrimenews.com. And it had a byline and a title, but it didn't have an author's name. So it's not that I'm not crediting them. It's that it was just on truecrimenews.com. This article says remains found in Utah desert over 40 years ago, positively identified as missing teen. And it was put out on March 20th, 2025. The byline was Provo, Utah for True Crime News. And it says investigators closed a cold case this week after they positively identified the remains of a John Doe found in the desert 42 years ago. According to the Provo Police Department, 17-year-old Robbie P., I think is his name, P-E-A-Y. He ran away from a youth treatment center in Salt Lake City on October 7th of 1982. He gets reported missing to the Provo Police Department, and he's been in all the national databases after he failed to return to the youth treatment center. And he didn't, show up at home, and he wasn't found anywhere or arrested anywhere. But about 4 months after he disappeared on October 7th, 1982, in February of 1983, a body was found in Arches National Park in Moab. It had a gunshot wound to the head. Police said that victim appeared to have had similar characteristics to Robbie, but officials could not identify the remains due to the amount of decomposition. So this Moab unidentified body it ends up listed as a John Doe. Several months later, officials find Robbie's truck in Lake Powell, which is about 350 miles away from Moab, where this unidentified body had been found. Police didn't have any other additional leads at the time, so the case goes cold. His family files for him to be declared legally dead in 1990, and essentially that's what's known as the 7-year rule. So he disappears at the end of 1982. By 1990, 7 years have passed with no additional information about him. So they place a gravestone on an empty grave in a Provo cemetery with Robbie's name on it. So Robbie's case remains a cold case until 2018. A Provo police detective puts the teen's information into NamUs. So they pull it out of some of the other databases, they collect all the information, and they put it into NamUs. And there's a forensic dentist there that notes that Robbie's x-ray had the wrong number on it. So they fix this. By fixing it, I mean they go and find the x-ray that's supposed to be there, and they make sure that the x-ray lines up with Robbie. And when they do that, this data match results in a high percentage match with this John Doe that had been found in Arches National Park back in 1983. The Office of the Medical Examiner requires them to go get DNA. this is where it gets complicated. The investigators working Robbie's case learn that Robbie had been adopted at birth. So whenever somebody's been adopted, certain jurisdictions, particularly, I'd say pre-1985, most of those adoptions occurred either under sort of familial circumstances or in the circumstances that required a court to seal the adoption. Are you familiar with this?
Yes, I am.
So they now have to prove what they're doing to a judge who's going to unseal this adoption. He doesn't have any living direct biological family members. So up and down, like from when they get the information, they go looking for mom and dad, and they look down the family lines, and they don't find anybody. But what they do end up doing is they run his DNA profile, which is from the body itself, and that leads detectives to an uncle. This uncle is able to then give a lineage DNA sample for comparison testing. They file to have the exhumation on the remains done for the John Doe, and around the same time, they learned that another agency had this John Doe's DNA on file, and they finally get everything together from all this. It's sort of a kerfuffle, and it comes back to match to Robbie. So they have a detective sergeant out there quoted in this article. His name is Nick Patterson, and he says, "Working cold cases as a detective is both time-consuming and challenging. You sift through old files and photos. You're trying to reconstruct the past, and it can feel like searching for a needle in a haystack. But the moment you uncover that long-awaited lead, the one that had eluded investigators for years, it makes all the effort worthwhile." So I thought that was an interesting example of like a really old cold case that if there was automatic data matching, it would almost be solved. Yeah, except for this like problem with the dental records. But yeah, it's interesting, right?
It is interesting. And actually, I mean, it is solved now, and that, that matters, but it's super sad.
Well, I wanted to ask you that. Is it solved? Like, do you consider this to be solving it?
I'm sorry, the body's been identified.
Right. That's why I was asking.
His disappearance is solved. His murder's not.
Right, because he's got this gunshot wound. So, I wondered when I was reading this, I did a little research on who he was, and I like circled back around, and I was like, he's kind of a prime candidate for having taken his own life. But
well, they would know that, right?
I think so, based on how the body had been found. They don't come out and say that, but they also don't come out and say
foul play is expected.
We have a suspect, or we have a theory, or anything like that.
Because it seems like even though they didn't have an identity for the body found with the gunshot blast, they would still be looking into like what happened.
Well, right? I want to know why the truck was 400 miles away from it all, but.
Well,
I mean, that could have been stolen because it had been abandoned there. There's all kinds of things that could be coming into play.
It's really sad. I mean, it really is sad. I'm glad he was. Okay, so yeah, you're right. There are two stages. I would say only the disappearance and reunification with the identity has been solved. I don't know that the other part's going to be solved.
Right. And so I bring all of this up because you and I had been talking about the murder of Sarah Ann Wood, which is one of these cases that is adjudicated, essentially. Where we had left off, we were talking about this guy named Lewis Lent out of Massachusetts. And in 1996, he is arrested and convicted of attempting to abduct a 12-year-old girl named Becky Savarese, who goes by Rose in all the court documents. He had her backpack, and he had suspicious items that investigators liken to being a snatch kit that I kind of call a kill kit. He's a 45-year-old janitor at the time, and they convict him on the attempted abduction. And in the course of their investigation and his arrest and the interviews after his arrest that become interrogations, he has essentially begun to confess to murders, one of which is Sarah Ann Woods, and we talked about Jimmy Bernardo. What was interesting about his case, and if you read this on the internet, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, if you read it without reading the court documents, there's some misinformation out there. And I hate to criticize whoever did this because I get how they did it. They weren't reading closely enough. So Louis Lent, in June of 1996, he ends up pleading guilty to Jimmy Bernardo's abduction and murder. On October the 16th, he receives a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. This is the young man he talks to at the movie theater and offers him some money to help him set up chairs, and he ends up abducting him. And ultimately, he probably assaulted this young man. That's the conclusion you and I are kind of looking at. We don't know for sure.
I can't imagine what the motive would be otherwise. I mean, I guess he could have been like practicing his abduction skills, maybe.
Right.
But no, everything tends to. I think he probably assaulted him. Yeah.
Right. And one of the other things that has happened and that we pulled from the different court paperwork is that he has this master plan to keep 11 victims in his house that he is sharing with other people. And he's sort of in the process of building this area that he's going to keep these victims in when he is ultimately arrested. So one of the news articles I found makes this mistake. It says 9 days after pleading guilty to Jimmy Bernardo's murder on October 25th, 1996. That's an error, and that error has been kind of snowballing for a while. That's two different things going on. He pleads guilty in June of 1996, and then he's sentenced for Jimmy Bernardo's abduction and murder on October the 16th. So it's 9 days after that. And it's important to differentiate that because the reason he comes back around to Sarah's case is essentially he was looking at 15 to 20 years in prison. He walks in June of 1996, and basically it looks like there's going to be a trial about whether or not he killed Jimmy Bernardo. But there's not, because he changes his plea at the last minute. He waits the summer, waits into the fall. In October, he's sentenced for that. And it's 15 to 20 years, becomes life without parole. And he swings back around to Sarah's case. And 9 days after getting that life without parole sentence, he decides he's going to plead guilty to Sarah Wood's abduction, rape, and murder. Now, this day, it's kind of a surprise to everybody when it happens. So Sarah's family is not even in the courtroom when he does it. But again, he refuses to provide any additional accurate information about where Sarah Wood is. He's going to end up being sentenced April 11th, 1997 by Judge Patrick Kirk under the convictions of second-degree murder. He gets sentenced to a concurrent term, meaning runs at the same time as these other sentences, of 25 years to life for Sarah's disappearance or abduction and her murder. But by the time this happens, Louis Lent has already recanted his confession. So he basically said, kind of, haha, was just playing with you, not real. And he hasn't been able to provide her body. So Judge Kirk tells him, I want you to go and think about, telling us where this body is. This is done because He delays the sentencing. He allows the Wood family to come in. And at the request of Sarah's parents, he's encouraging, with a delay of about 60 days, Lewis to basically reveal the location of Sarah's body. So in the months immediately prior to being sentenced, Michael Daly, who is the district attorney of Herkimer County, offers Lewis a plea deal. So the idea was he would not have to serve his life sentence inside a state prison if he will draw investigators an accurate map to the location of Sarah's body. He refuses this. He refuses victim impact statements where Sarah's parents and her brother Dusty basically beg him to reveal the whereabouts during the sentencing phase of his trial. They are reading Bible passages to him. They are talking very specifically to him about how this is his way to forgiveness. He can repent, and maybe the next life, or if you believe in an afterlife, things will be better for him. And Judge Kirk makes one final request, that he reveal the location of her body immediately prior to imposing this sentence of 25 years to life for second-degree murder. And Lewis refuses. And the judge makes a comment that he would have no hesitation in imposing the death penalty upon Lewis Lynn if he had the legal option to do so. But very little is known about what is real related to Lewis Lynn's confession into the abduction, rape, and murder of Sarah Wood. So for Lewis's part, Lewis is still in prison today. Investigators still go and talk to him. If you read some of the more recent materials on him, I can say for sure that in November of 2023, some of the information that Lewis Lynn has provided leads investigators to conduct a search in Green Mountain National Forest in Vermont, which is just across the Massachusetts border. So investigators go out there, and we've been to rural Vermont before, looking for a serial killer's victims that we couldn't find. And the search effort, again, for Sarah Wood, ends with no body being found. His information that he's provided over the years has been pretty useless. But I will say in June of 2024, so less than a year ago, authorities searched a property in Lanesboro, Massachusetts that was connected to Lewis Lynn. It was a property that had been searched in the 1990s. At the time, it belonged to someone who was a friend of Lewis, and Lewis had been doing some work in the basement of this home. The idea being maybe he had attempted this chamber idea before. But as of right now, nothing has been made public, which, because a year has almost passed, like you and I are recording this in March and we're releasing it, sort of accordingly to our year. I don't think they find anything that leads them to know where Sarah is. So I have all kinds of questions about this that I'm going to pause and talk to you about. But I get the feeling that we're not getting the whole story from Lewis, or we're getting complete BS from Lewis. According to the prosecutors up there, they state that they believe Lewis Lynn is just taunting everybody. And in 2013, Michael Daly said, "I believe that he has misled us intentionally in a number of different areas. He has given us all the information we need to find the location. He just hasn't given us the final piece, and he is challenging us to find that ourselves." Do you think there's any possibility this guy is just making this up?
I don't think that he's making up that he killed her.
Because of the details that you mentioned in the last episode about the bike and...
if we're to believe him, right?
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, not him, but if we're to believe what the investigators have stated, which is he said her bike was too big for her, which it was. The chain was broken, which it was, and he described what she was wearing, which was a pink shirt that had a message on it, and then and turquoise shorts or whatever. And there was enough information there that his confession was credible.
Yeah.
Right? Because now there's always a chance that that's not the case, right? But I assume this was a big deal. Her disappearance was a big deal, and the investigators that were working it were paying attention to what was going on. Not to mention, Sarah looked a whole lot like his next victim that survived and got away and got him convicted.
Yeah.
Especially, it's specifically mentioned that she was wearing glasses at the time she was out and about. And when the victim that survived popped up, when it's Becky, right?
Yeah.
When she popped up, I was like, well, that's probably exactly what Sarah looked like with glasses. And it was uncanny, really. And so it is a credible lead. I don't think that he is ever going to give up the location of her body. I feel like I'm not sure why. I know it's mean. It's out of meanness, right?
Yeah.
It's also possibly out of shame, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but I don't think that that's the kind of thing that you and I or anybody listening, unless they are, a psychopathic killer, would ever really understand what his position is on why he's doing it. Every time he lies to the police, every time they go take on a huge search expedition, I guess he gets to giggle at them from his jail cell, or if they take him with them, he gets to watch from the back seat. And it is entirely possible that those are his jollies these days, right? I mean, it's lame, and none of us would ever do that, right?
Yeah.
But then again, think of all the other stuff he did. This is the guy who wanted to have, 11 caskets of live girls from the ages of 11 to 17 or whatever he said that he could pull out when he wanted to play with them.
Yeah. Maybe this is the way he's able to do that? He's able to...
I don't know. I can't really correlate the two things, but it's a weird thought to begin with, right? Just part of the key of all the true crime things that we do is when you get to the stage where there's investigations and they're trying to get to some conclusions and close cases and find missing people who were taken and they have their captor in custody. And we want that closure.
Yeah.
And there's zero remorse to the extent that he won't say, this is where her body is, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. If he didn't have the details, I will say, if he didn't have the details that they felt like were credible,
yeah,
I would say that he was not responsible for her death.
I lean that way too.
But I have to go off what they've said, right? And she really does. The pictures of Sarah look a whole lot like Becky.
Yeah, I agree.
And that indicates that there's a type happening there.
Yeah.
But I briefly stated before, I feel like there's a different way to get around to him, to get him to come out with it.
You had pointed out that if we somehow, without talking to him directly, if we somehow indicated that a new suspect had been identified, that it's close to being announced that another person did this and the case is going to be resolved.
Right. And it's not going to be him.
Right.
And then the only card he would have to play is her body.
Yep. That's all he has to do. I think there's an element of truth to Louis Lent that actually kind of shocks me that I'm sitting in a position to say this, but I think one of his early statements where he's talking to the investigators and he hasn't quite honed his ability to play games with them is that there's a body nearby that he doesn't want people to find. And when I hear that, it has a ring of truth to me because I've heard other people say things like that.
What do you think that stems from?
I don't like the like him saying it to them that way.
Well, like the whole like, I'm a killer, I kill people, I'm confessing to some of it, but like there's a body real close I don't want you to find. To me, it's always there's something that's shameful to them.
Well, in this instance, I kind of go, maybe it's a boy. Maybe it's
but he
more
confessed to a
advanced.
boy.
I know. Maybe it's a more advanced killing. Maybe it's an older person, or maybe like I thought maybe it would be someone vulnerable or someone that was like he had done something particularly atrocious to them, or it revealed some other piece of a pattern. Like if we know this one, then we know what to look for. And then we'll know multiple things he's done, and then he'll really be a monster, and he doesn't want to be that monster, but he kind of does. So I don't know what to do with that information.
It's really hard for me to sort of fathom why. Except it's not really hard for me to fathom. I realize I just don't understand it. But it seems like if you're going down, you might as well unburden everybody else, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is everything that happened. This is all I got, right? Of course, I don't know that investigators would ever be happy with that, and they may continue to prod and poke at him, and that might be annoying. He may enjoy it. He may not have been having conversations with people, and he may have been not playing games, but just talking, right? Who knows? I mean, we don't know, really. I don't know that this dude is actually like some sort of mastermind.
Right.
I think that he literally is just a bad dude. And he picked on little girls because he was a bully and he was a sexual sadist and he was a loser.
Yeah. So we have to look at this from a timeline perspective for a minute. So we know about James Joseph Bernardo. That was October 22nd, 1990. We know that he attempted to abduct Becky Savarese. This is from January of 1994. We've put Sarah firmly in the category of having been abducted in August of 1993. So we have to tell you about a different missing persons case to tell you the next part of this shenanigans. This is a young boy who goes missing from Westfield, Massachusetts in November of 1992. His name is James Donald Lesher Jr. He was born October 15th, 1976. He would have been 16 years old when he went missing. He was described as 5'2", 110 pounds. He is a Caucasian male with brown hair and blue eyes. A lot of people in his life appear to have called him Jamie. Jamie was classified as a special needs child. It's said that he was hyperactive and functioned at the level of a 12-year-old. He was enrolled at Westfield Alternative School in 1992, and he had planned to ride his gray-green Huffy mountain bicycle from his father's residence in Westfield to his grandmother's house in Blandford, Massachusetts. So he's going to ride his bike about 8 miles door to door. Now, his bike was a birthday present on October 15th of 1992, and this is November 6th of 1992. From what I can read, there was a bicycle race that day in Blandford. So when he gets to his grandmother's house, he's going to see her, and then he's going to turn around and see this race. But he never arrives to his grandmother's house. A server at a Friendly's restaurant in Westfield said that Jamie had come to the Friendly's restaurant on November the 8th. So this is 2 days after he's reported missing. And then on November the 11th, a hunter discovers his brand new bicycle abandoned near a pond in a wooded area of the city. Authorities drain the pond. They conduct an extensive air and ground search, but no evidence has ever been found related to Jamie's whereabouts at this pond or ever again. He's never been heard from after this. And authorities and his family, they write him off as potentially being a runaway. But over time, they begin to believe that not having seen him, something had happened to him. So in 2013, for some reason, authorities visit Louis Lent, and they're there to talk about Sarah Wood. And he inexplicably confesses to having abducted and murdered Jamie Lusher. So he tells authorities that he will give them all the information about Jamie, but in exchange, he does not want to be prosecuted for Jamie's murder, which I think is BS, but they go for it. They tell him that if you tell us what happened, we won't prosecute you, and we will figure out like how to do what we need to do to recover him. So according to this confession, Jamie is abducted close to his home in Westfield, Massachusetts, which kind of rules out the Friendly sighting of him on November the 8th. And it puts us back at Jamie's bicycle. So this is in Westfield. It's found on November the 11th by a pond. And what Louis tells authorities is that he took him to the town of Beckett, which is about 25 minutes away. And that's where his remains could be found. Although to this day, his remains have never been recovered. So they go in for information on Sarah Wood, and they come out with yet another weird puzzle. I think that's the right word for it. A puzzle, right?
Right. And we have to take it with a grain of salt. I mean, I don't want to be like Monday morning quarterbacking investigators, but I always wonder about these cases.
21 years have passed almost. From the time that Jamie disappears to the time Louis Lent confesses.
Right. And I mean, he didn't forget where the body was, though.
No, he did not forget.
I mean, if he knew, right?
No, he doesn't. I think if he knew, I guess we have to decide, do we believe him?
Well, right. And see, I don't know that, now the bike thing is a trend, right?
Yep, it's a piece of a pattern.
And there's so much here. You know, I feel like we have to say, okay, the investigators had to have believed something. They had to find him credible in this confession. However, you have a situation where you've got one little boy that was already found, and his murder was unsolved, that he's confessed to. You've got a little girl who is missing. That's Sarah. And then you've got a living victim who faked an asthma attack to get away. Now, she wasn't on a bike. She was walking, right?
Right.
And now you've got another little boy on a bike. I mean, he wasn't a little boy. He was 16. But you've got a boy on a bike who, again, his bike was found and he is not found, right?
Yep.
And so I could make this seem like it wasn't him, like almost all of it except for the live victim. The weird part about it is to have a live victim smack dab in the middle.
Yeah.
If there was a way we could know what the credibility factor of his confessions were, I would say that this is a guy who daydreamed a lot, and his one and only attempt failed.
See, that's how I feel about him. You're talking about the fact that like he can't basically abduct Becky Cervasi, which in some ways she does probably outsmart him. Based on looks alone, Louis Lent does not strike me as an extremely bright guy, but then he does all this stuff, which could be like, Henry Lucas and Otis Toole. He could just be doing it to get field trips and privileges.
Well, I just find it odd that a kid walking got away from him, but kids on bikes couldn't.
It's interesting, right?
It doesn't really make sense, right? And okay, I don't know that we can decipher the credibility factors. Not to mention, he's been convicted of Sarah's apparent murder, right?
Yeah.
Even though she hasn't been found. And he made, I don't know, I'm not really sure why you make deals when you are in prison for the rest of your life.
Like what you're going to get out of it? I have a theory on that. I'll get to it.
Okay.
I think, so we get to Green Mountain, right?
Okay.
My gut is while he's been imprisoned, he has learned that he could potentially be transferred to a federal prison, which might be nicer digs for him if he confesses to something that is tied to federal property. And I think that's how he's trying to find places where he could confess to something that'll get him basically moved to the federal system.
Huh, that's interesting. I would think that would require a conviction, though.
It would definitely require a conviction of some kind. I even looked at where the reason I say this is I looked at Beckett, Massachusetts, and I noticed that they had a national park office near the quarry and forest that appears to be where they searched for Jamie. And that made me think, if Jamie is there, then and Sarah is like allegedly maybe at Green Mountain. We're no longer dealing with local places he knows. We're dealing with places he's found on a map that he believes are connected to him getting federal charges and moving to the federal system. My theory is pure speculation, but it's better than anything else I've come up with.
Right. So I do know I don't have the exact source, but I heard it. Like, I didn't read it. Somebody said that they had evidence when Sarah was abducted, the day she was abducted, they had evidence of him cashing a check at a certain time.
Not in that area or in that area?
Well, what they were saying was that, like, after they had searched and not found her, that the evidence that he had cashed a check at a specific time, it seemed to indicate that there was no way he could have gotten to where he had told them to search to begin with.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So I think I remember reading about this, and I want to say that it was like tied back to Massachusetts, so it couldn't have been Raquette Lake. Does that sound right?
That's possible. Something about it just made it seem like it wasn't just a mistaken memory, it was a lie.
Yeah. So another thing happens here. We'll get to like kind of the last piece of this puzzle in a second. July 2013, when he makes his confession, he doesn't keep the confession for long. He recants.
That's another thing.
Right. So authorities state they don't plan to prosecute Louis Lent. He's not getting out of prison. There's no reason to mess with him. But they do initiate a search for Jamie's body in Greenwater Pond, which is apparently 88 acres in size and is up to 58 feet deep in certain places. They search for 3 days, which I have no idea how they search for 3 days and think they're going to find somebody in a space that big. They don't find any human remains. They don't find any of Jamie's clothing or belongings. They say that they haven't given up hope of locating his body, but they sort of, at least publicly, aren't searching anymore. So Jamie's parents, they end up being divorced in 1992. So Jamie, at the time he disappeared, he had been living with his dad. His father described him as moody, immature, disliking school, and kind of not having much of a social group. This is all from like the Charlie Project descriptions. I am wondering if Lewis was picking up on this kid in a way that he could grab him, or if Jamie truly was kind of a runaway. Except for the bike being found abandoned, I don't see anything here. Even authorities say that, it's a detailed confession. I don't know what that means. They've never made it public. It's a 2013 confession, so it's 12 years ago. We haven't found Jamie's body. It leaves me with more questions about this kid than answers. And I don't know that, we consider him anything more than a suspect, even though he confesses and recants. Does that make sense?
I have a tendency to agree with it. I mean, it's an odd thing. It's a very odd thing, and the recantation just adds another layer of oddity to it, as far as I'm concerned. Because,
to my knowledge, he doesn't have any quote victims where he has not essentially either recanted or tried to distance himself from it.
he's also not been able to send anybody to one of his actual victims' bodies.
Right. So we had one body is found. We have one living victim who gets away. And then we have so far 2 victims that are not found. And he ends up being a suspect in another strange abduction. I guess we should talk about her now. I know people link him publicly to this, but there's like a different theory here. This is actually from April of 1986. On April 19th of 1986, and we're not in Massachusetts for this one either. We go back to Saratoga Springs, New York. This is Tammy Ann McCormick. So she's 13 years old. She had been born July 3rd of 1972. She's a white female. She has light brown hair and hazel eyes. Charlie Project has a bunch of pictures of her. I think I saw an age progression over there, but it might be 10 or 12 years old now. She was 5'5", 108 pounds, and described as wearing a denim jacket, a yellow shirt, black corduroy pants, and beige boots. She had homemade tattoos on her arm. I don't know if they're literal tattoos or scars. They kind of describe, in one of the articles I read from the Saratoga Springs, it described it more like she had used a sharp implement to kind of scar her initials into her shoulder. Her ears were pierced. So Tammy misses her morning bus to Saratoga Springs Junior High School on West Circular Street in Saratoga Springs on April 19th, 1986. After she misses the bus, she tells her sister she's going to hitchhike. She never arrives for her 7th grade classes that day, and she has never been heard from again. But around the time of her disappearance, she had told friends she was planning on running away and that she was potentially going down to Florida. Her mother did not believe she would have run away because she left everything behind. On the day of her disappearance, she was wearing her most worn-out pair of pants, which I guess sometimes this can be your favorite pair of pants, and a pair of uncomfortable boots that she said gave her blisters. She had been living in a neighborhood in Saratoga Springs at the time of her disappearance called Geyser Crest. Her mother reported her missing on April 21st, 1986. So this is 2 days after she was last seen. There are unconfirmed sightings of her all over the place. Florida, Maine, Massachusetts, Vermont, California, New York. None of these have ever been confirmed. And in February of 2011, authorities made an announcement about her case. They believed that she had been murdered. And they believed that they had potentially identified her killer. But it's not Lewis Lent. Even though Lewis is a suspect in this case, kind of because of his age and his geographical traveling, but the suspect they announced is a man named Arthur Mason Slayball II. And Arthur Slayball was a corrections officer at Mount McGregor Correctional Facility up in Winton, New York. He had died of a heart attack 10 years prior to this announcement at the age of 41. He would have been in his mid-20s when Tammy disappeared, and he knew the McCormick family. In fact, Tammy knew and admired him and thought of him as sort of a mentor. According to authorities, he had long been considered a person of interest in her case, but they did not have any evidence against him until after he died in 2001. According to what I've read, and the Charlie Project picked up on this, and the Saratogian, which is a paper up there, witnesses came forward after his death and said they had information that they had been too afraid to disclose before he passed away. Her parents have moved, but she has 5 siblings that still live in Geyser Crest, which is the neighborhood that she disappeared from. Authorities are still hoping that they can somehow recover her body. Louis Lent is considered an additional suspect in this case. So there's an article that pops up by Joe Guillo for Fox 10. This is out of Northampton, New York, and it's from November of 2017. So keep in mind, that's like 6 years after an announcement has been made about Arthur Slabaum. It says Saratoga Springs Police, the FBI, and state forensics investigators brought in an excavator to dig up a piece of land in Northampton. They're all working together on a cold case dating back to April of 1986. Tammy McCormick was just 13 years old when she disappeared from a Saratoga Springs neighborhood about 30 miles from there. The property sits along Route 30 right next to the town diner. The property is owned by the Slabaugh family. Now they rent it out. That last name came up previously in this investigation, and Arthur Slabaugh was a person of interest from the very beginning. But it wasn't until 2011 they received enough information to act on. Over the years, hundreds of tips and leads have come in, even taking investigators out of state, but they never came back with anything solid. Police say this most recent tip does appear to have some potential, at least providing enough information to get a judge to issue a warrant. Just recently, over the last few months, some new information has come to us. Saratoga Police Lieutenant Bob Gilson said, as time passes by, people's attitude changes and they're more willing to share information, and for whatever reason they do. Neighbors say that Mason and his brother used to bury all kinds of things in their backyard, including car parts and boats, at all hours of the night. After years of complaints, police say the neighbors pushed the trash back and put up a fence. There is a lot of talk going on around the community. It's understandable because it's a tight-knit community, and they are curious about what's going on in their backyards. The equipment and the resources we have here, we feel will best suit our efforts to find what's in the ground there as we try to find Tammy. We do what we can do, but we lawfully can and try to investigate leads coming in. We get some tips that come in that aren't anything. We get some ones that come in here, information we're able to act on. Just because it's 31 years doesn't mean Tammy is forgotten by any means. And they point out that they have had tips about Arthur Slabaugh, but they've also had tips about Louis Lent. So they're never able to, according to this, truly eliminate Louis or Arthur as potential suspects. So this is 6 years after they basically say Arthur's a murderer, that we are still looking at Louis Lent and Arthur Slabaugh, and we're digging into his property. The article goes on to quote the Daily Gazette, and the Daily Gazette basically says the same thing, but they point out that other searches in the area, the same area, were linked to properties related to Louis Lent. So I don't know what the outcome of that is as in terms of like time and space, but that seems really weird to me. And I wondered if they were like somehow linking the two of them together. Do you think?
Well, I didn't actually see the part about Louis Lent having property there.
I haven't seen that either, but it's mentioned in this article, and it comes up. I looked to see if I could like find it in time, and I definitely found it. I had to use the Wayback Machine. I definitely found 2 references to Lent from the Daily Gazette, but I don't find any reference to him like actually physically being tied to Saratoga Springs.
I had a couple of opinions about Tammy's case. I was I was trying to look back too, and because I read a lot in a little bit of time, and some of these, I mean, they seem like they're credible articles, but I get really frustrated with all the ads popping up all the time and having to refresh and stuff. That's what it seemed to be giving me, right?
Yeah.
It did get some press sort of recently, but somewhere in the mirage of articles I read, and it seemed credible to me at the time I was reading it like just yesterday, I believe it was the new investigator. Perhaps it was the chief of police or whatever in that area. He made the statement, something to the effect of that he's interviewed like over 100 people, and that you've got people like cross corroborating these little hints that they've been able to kind of piece together, right?
Right.
And he didn't really allude to anything that he was talking about. However, he did say that he had definitive information that was credible that Tammy had gone to Arthur's apartment that morning.
Okay.
Additionally, Tammy babysat Arthur's girlfriend's children. To me, that's a pretty definitive link as far as a possibility, right? So she didn't just know him and admire him. Like they had whatever it was. He didn't say what it was, but he said that at this point in time, he had credible information that after she left her house, she had gone to his apartment that morning, the morning that she left and was never seen again. Obviously, the fact that this dude died in 2001 or whatever, he died, quite a bit back, and it's hard to kind of move forward because the suspect's dead, right? And you have to weigh the credibility of people coming forward with information about like, oh, this guy committed a crime after he's dead. For whatever I mean, they can find it credible or not credible or whatever. It made sense to me. I don't know, like, in terms of like how far away it was or whatever. Maybe she thought he might give her a ride to school. Maybe, I don't know what the steps there are, but I feel like the investigator had gotten enough information to start putting these things together. And it's not like 100 people knew he had killed this girl.
Right.
It's just 100 people had like these little bits of information, right?
Right.
And they were able to kind of construct it. I don't think Louis Lent is responsible for Tammy. That's very confusing as far as the land and everything goes. I don't know. I don't know what's happening there. And I think that it's a pretty straightforward case. And so Arthur left behind children and siblings, right?
Correct. And those people are going to be coming forward.
Well, they have pushed back hard on the implication that he could be responsible.
So you think that it might be lumping it on a dead person just because he was connected to the missing? Is that what they're saying?
That's not what I think, but like, no, like they're saying like, oh, there's no way he was involved in her disappearance.
Okay.
But clearly other people that aren't his children who, they were probably children at the time, but they're adults now, right?
Yeah.
Maybe. And his siblings, they're saying, no, he wasn't involved. Well, it's up to investigators to weigh the credibility there. There's not going to be a trial, right?
Correct.
And without additional information, they're not going to find her body if he is, in fact, the perpetrator. Now, I don't feel like this stuff starts out of nothing, right?
I would tend to agree.
the fact that and there's not a lot of details given. However, you've got a teenage girl who missed the bus. There's confirmation she was at the apartment that morning after she had left her home. So she was at Arthur's apartment. She could have been going there to see him, his girlfriend, whoever, whatever, right?
Yeah.
I have a feeling it's probably his girlfriend who has spoken out. Because, if he said, oh, I'll take her to school, and then she finds out, oh, she's missing, what the hell, right?
Yeah.
Then, plus the other part of that is, I can see where people would be scared to come forward until after he died. Because it's horrifying, right?
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that they didn't go ahead and come forward, and I hate it for the family. This was a completely different time there back in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
And there was a lull between the time she actually disappeared, because she left to go to school that morning, and she never even made it to school, right? So something happened immediately, and she wasn't reported missing for 2 days.
Right.
And so immediately there was, a gap. And so I think that it would make perfect sense that in most cases where, it's a teenager who has seemingly disappeared, it's up in the air, could they have run away? A lot of times if foul play happens, I would say that it could very well involve a young adult that they interacted with previously, right?
Correct. Well, so Louis Lynn's name over the years gets attached to several cases. I'm just going to say that everything that I'm saying right now, it is sourced. You can go and read about it in different places on the internet. What's interesting about his attachment to these other cases is that, like in this case with Arthur Slaybaugh, we have Louis Lynn attached, but then there's also someone that seems to be a pretty feasible suspect, kind of on the edge of these cases, if that makes sense. And we'll start with this one. Kimberly Ann Moreau, Moreau, she, on May 11th, 1986, up in Jay, Maine, she cancels plans to attend her high school junior prom because she's had an argument with her boyfriend. According to different sources, she went to spend the night with Rhonda Brenton, who was her best friend, and they met up with two 25-year-old male acquaintances. One of those acquaintances was Brian Enman. Another one was a man named Darren Judry. And the group attended a house party that was pretty close to Rhonda's house. According to all accounts, they left sometime between 2 and 3 in the morning. And Rhonda got a ride with Darren, and Kimberly rode with Brian. Brian tells police that during the ride home, Kimberly was upset about a fight that had occurred with her boyfriend, and she demanded that he drop her off about half a mile from her house. Now, the police did not believe his story at the time, and they focused on him as a suspect. They searched his car for any signs of foul play, but they came up empty-handed. Multiple witnesses came forward in this case, and 2 of those witnesses said that around 3:45 a.m., which is when Brian would have been letting Kimberly out of the car, they spotted a white car parked on the side of the street with its headlights on. Another witness claims to have seen a girl resembling Kimberly running on the sidewalk. Police have never been able to identify the owner of that vehicle, but they believe if it's not Brian, that person could be involved in her disappearance. According to reports, Kimberly's father keeps in touch with Brian in hopes of finding out what happened to his daughter. Kimberly's sister believes there was an accidental death and that people that she was there with that night potentially helped to cover up that death. I did find a couple of little articles about this case, and I found a News Center Maine article basically talking to the father. Essentially, in 2015, authorities were still searching properties that had belonged to Brian's family and then later to Brian, hoping they might find out something related to Kimberly's disappearance. She was pronounced dead in 1993, so another person on that 7-year mark. Brian Inman is a person of interest in that case, but Lewis Lent is on the person of interest list in that case as well. And I do not know what would tie him to Maine. I could not find anything related to that. I did pull up her old NCMEC profile. They have an age progression on there, and they have one picture of her. She looks kind of similar to Tammy facially. That profile is not the best. It says she was last seen leaving the home with an unknown individual driving a late model white Trans Am, but I think that's been settled elsewhere by these other articles.
She's on Charlie Project. There's like 9 pictures of her. And all I will say about that is, obviously, it doesn't really the story doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right?
No, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, they were basically out drinking with slightly older people that happen to be older in a way that like is a huge difference from a
right. And
17-year-old girl.
The last person to be seen with somebody who is now missing is a suspect. I'm not saying it has to be him,
right.
But, you can draw some logical conclusions here. And if what he says is accurate, which nobody knows for sure it is, what could have possibly happened? Well, on her walk from, what did he say? Half a mile? What was it? Half a mile from her house?
Yeah.
Okay, so what happened in half a mile? And then, if the conclusion is probably not anything,
right,
then he's lying. Why is he lying? Right?
Yeah.
And so you just work your way backwards. Now, why has he not been charged with this? Well, I don't know. It seems like it's really sad her dad has kept in touch with him.
Yeah,
I don't know
if
that's
little strange.
I don't know if that's like a cordial keeping in touch or what. Her sister's saying that she thought she died accidentally, which is entirely possible. And it could put culpability on others as well, right?
Right.
It seems like there's some more people that should know some stuff. I don't know. Based on it, it's never seemed to me like when you've got these events taking place and you've got several people who are saying this is what happened, like we went out, we were drinking, that kind of thing. Like it's not a matter of endless places that she could be at that point.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And she had her boyfriend's class ring on her, a kid named Mike Staples' class ring. So if you do find the body somewhere there, even if it's not whatever, that ring should still be there. You know what I mean?
Unless they took it off of her.
That's true. It could have been disposed of. But I don't see how they're getting Lewis Lent. Like this girl was 5'7", 135.
She's also older. She's 17.
17, yeah. So, we're getting into like kind of a stretch. Somehow he's also he's linked to Monique Santiago. Have you heard of this one?
Mm-hmm.
So she goes missing March 29th, 1990. She's an 11-year-old girl, 4'11", 90 pounds. She's last seen in Albany, New York. She was leaving for school at the time. Her family had resided in an apartment on Washington Avenue. She called her mom at work at around noon and said that she had missed the school bus and she would be home for the day. Her mother returned to the residence during the evening and realized her daughter was gone. Monique has never been heard from again. Now, mom waits 8 hours before reporting her daughter as a missing child, and she had some of those common misconceptions about police departments and missing persons reports where she thought they potentially wouldn't take a report for an extended period of time and didn't know what it was. And also, you don't have Google back then where you can look these things up. As a result, the investigation misses out on probably something like 8 to 10 hours. if not more. So most of the leads could potentially have gone cold. There was an adult male acquaintance of Monique who admitted that he had taken her to SUNY Albany 5 days before her presumed abduction. He stated he didn't have any permission from the girl's mother to drive her there, but he said that he had seen Monique in a parking lot on Central Avenue in Albany, across the street from a former Woolworths department store. He felt sorry for her. He purchased snacks for her, and he allegedly admitted, according to the Charlie Project description, that while she waited in line, he had secretly masturbated. Don't know why that came up. He was questioned by authorities less than 48 hours after Monique's disappearance, and he signed a typewritten statement. He was never charged due to a lack of evidence, but some officials believe that he was probably involved. The man did not have a criminal record. He maintained his innocence and claims that investigators were fabricating parts of his statement. And my guess is they're fabricating the masturbation. Mom and Monique had relocated to Albany from New York City in the late 80s after there was a murder in front of their former residence. Authorities had looked into the possibility that she had been harmed because potentially she had witnessed that crime, but there was no evidence to support that theory. They also investigated Monique's stepfather, and her stepfather was in prison at the time of her disappearance. But they questioned him to see if he'd had any possible altercations with other inmates, someone who may have been wanting to get revenge. But they determined that there was nothing to do with. I said something wrong. Yeah, her mom. No, I said that right. They said that his sentence and what was going on with the stepfather had nothing to do with Monique's disappearance. The mom and stepdad, they both end up dying after her disappearance, so they're not here to sort of champion her case. Her nickname was Pebbles, by the way. I thought that was interesting.
That is interesting.
There was one more young lady who gets tied into this mix, and this is from March 27th, 1985. Have you heard of this one?
Karen Wilson?
Yes, Karen Wilson.
Okay. Yeah, I have.
So Karen Wilson was 22 years old, but she was like the other things that he looked for. She was 5'3", 110 pounds. She was last seen in Colony, New York, in the 1600 block of Central Avenue around 7:20 p.m. She had gone and bought a red T-shirt and a blue T-shirt in preparation for spring break. She was headed to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and she may or may not have gotten a tan at the tanning hut. She had booked an appointment, but no one at the salon remembers having seen her come in. Initially, the investigators who took that case believed that Wilson had got on a bus near the Butcher Block restaurant on Central Avenue and taken it over to Fuller Avenue, but it was later determined that she could not have gotten on that bus and might have just walked to Fuller Avenue instead. Witnesses told authorities that they had seen her there shortly after this time frame, but she's never been heard from again. None of her personal belongings have ever been located. Now, according to the investigators, what she was carrying with her that night was a gray cloth pocketbook, a blue nylon wallet, a green and white plastic bag from Up and Down or Ups and Down, and possibly a blue knapsack that may have contained a yellow dress. They have kind of a map that they put out there where they show her walking toward the State University of New York at Albany. So we're back at University of Albany. They believe that she was abducted somewhere near 6 Mile Waterworks, which is one of the entrance ramps to Interstate 90. She was a senior at the time, by the way. That's another unusual thing about this case, is that she's that far into college. It's very dark. The road is not very heavily traveled. It would have been possible for someone to pull her into a vehicle in seconds without having any witnesses. And they have a sketch of someone described as a strange man seen in the area. He's never been identified, and he is sought for questioning as a witness, if not a suspect. And they did look into the possibility that maybe she had gone on to Florida because spring break was coming up. They found no evidence that she'd ever left New York. One of the suspects in her case died in an accidental house fire in 2013. and authorities stated they were never able to directly link him to Karen Wilson's disappearance. They didn't think he could have been involved if he had reported to work at his usual time. And they also sometimes throw Suzanne Lyle in with potentially being related to Karen Wilson, although their disappearances take place many years apart. She's a 1985 disappearance, and Suzanne Lyle disappears in 1998. We've covered her at length, and she's certainly not related to Louis Lent. I think if you take Louis Lent's glasses off, he could potentially be the guy in the sketch with Karen Wilson, but it's sort of a stretch for me to get there.
I mean, it's possible. There's not really a whole lot to go off of there.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't know what to make of Mr. Louis Lent or the Arthur Slabaugh story.
I think that it's a weird connection. Louis Lent, I do think that at the point, I think you said it was maybe 2013, whenever he gave his latest confession that didn't yield a body, right?
Right.
I feel like they looked, and I looked real quick just now. I was looking for, I just looked for females that went missing between 1985 and 1994.
Yeah.
From 11 to 17 in New York, Massachusetts, and Maine. I don't know if there were any other states. And there's only 19 of them. And everybody that you were talking about, except for Karen, because she was older, everybody was on that list, right?
Yeah.
So there's not a whole lot of cases. I haven't gone through all these cases, but I have a feeling they literally just looked at any case that could possibly fit the MO, and the MO would be that they were out somewhere and they disappeared.
Yeah.
Because that seems to be the MO. Now, with Monique, we're at a disadvantage there because we have information that she went with a what did they call it? An adult acquaintance.
Yeah, adult male acquaintance.
Right, and she went off without permission, and that indicates he could have very well done something to her, but it also indicates a willingness to hang out, to plan activities or whatever with adult acquaintances that her parents may or may not have known, right?
Right.
And so that's a wide net, sort of. But there's no question that, she could have come. I don't know how she met these people. The guy describes a very strange situation. All of it was strange, right?
Yeah.
Of course, it might have been different back then. I don't think so. Not to that extent where you, see a youngish girl and you decide you're going to take her to the university campus.
Yeah,
what the heck is even happening there?
I mean, the whole secret masturbation thing, there's a lot of that one. I honestly feel like there's maybe some BS going on from the investigators who don't know what they're doing or don't have a good handle on this case or something. There's a couple of odd things there. But I also, with all of these, I kind of think it's a stretch for anybody beyond, Tammy McCormick, I think, is a stretch, and then everybody else is certainly a stretch. Kimberly Monroe. I think all of these are probably not going to be related to Louis Lent unless somebody can give me some pretty firm timeline on him, or if he ever responds to my messages to him, maybe he'll be able to tell me more. I circle back around to him, and I think he's interesting. He's certainly weird. I think you have to be kind of right, though. How does he screw up Becky's abduction, but have carried out these other abductions where the bodies are really never found?
It's odd, right? I mean, that's I'm sorry?
It's strange. It's really strange.
Well, because, I mean, it's a wide field where you've got, one body found, one live person escape, two witnesses gone forever, or two victims gone forever.
Yeah.
Maybe he was learning. I don't know. It seems like, though, obviously I've never spoken to this guy, but, there's always a way to get to somebody and, manipulate them into doing what you want them to do. Most of us don't do that, right? But in this case, I think that there's some buttons that could be pushed that would cause him to give up the information if he has it. And after that happened, if he doesn't give it up, I mean, I would have to conclude that there's something up, right?
Yeah, he bothers me from the perspective that, like, he has potentially derailed 4 or 5 investigations here with his nonsense. They seem to have gotten over him with the Tammy McCormick case, but, like, I would have to see what evidence they're chasing Arthur on to do that myself. And the other thing is, he's got the kind of story that at this point, I think you release the confessions.
Oh, so we could hear what he said.
Yeah. He would be a case that I would be interested in pursuing with more information to rule out, like, a lot of the BS factor.
Right. And so the timing of Sarah's disappearance, Becky's attempted abduction happened just months later, right? I mean, I think it was 4 months later. And I can see and it was 100 miles apart, I think.
Yeah.
And I could see where there was a correlation there, especially because they looked very similar.
Yeah.
I can't even get over how similar they looked. And it made sense, right? You could actually get a sense of what happened to Sarah just from Becky giving her account of what happened to her, right?
Yeah.
And the only thing about it is Becky was walking and got away. I guess it's possible that Sarah was more, which don't get me wrong, Becky was she seemed friendly in the interview she gave, like shortly after, I guess, it happened. But, maybe it never occurred to Sarah that she needed to get away from the situation, right?
Yeah.
Now, he had a gun, according to Becky, that he said, you see this gun? Do what I say or you're going to get hurt. And so, I don't know. It's just, there's something about that, like maybe some sort of desperation or something. I wish that there was a more concrete connection, and I don't really understand why there's not, because it seems like this would be like a huge deal, right?
Yeah.
Especially since you've got these children who have never been found. And I know the approach has to be off, because otherwise somebody could have gotten it out of him if he has the knowledge. I really start wondering, like, is he smart enough to have made all this up? And if so, why did he do that?
Well, I went down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out why, but also the thing I started, like, tagging for my missing persons cases that he might be involved in were bicycles.
Well, right? I mean, Sarah was on a bike.
Yeah, I did find one that'll come up in a later episode. Is not related to, I don't think it's related to Louis Lent, but I found a bicycle, like, off a wooded road, and it connects back to a missing person. And I was like, I wonder if that could be like another Louis Lent possibility, because it's the right time frame. But again, how is he screwing up these later abductions?
Right. And I don't know. It just doesn't really make sense, but there could be something to it that I don't understand. I will admit that. It seems like, so especially during the 90s, when the 80s and 90s, I guess, it wasn't as novel for somebody to disappear when riding a bike, right?
Right.
Seems like that was actually like something that happened quite a bit, just like with like runners, right?
Correct.
Because you're not in your home or whatever, and you're kind of out in the middle of the world, so to speak. And you have more there's more of an opportunity for either a stranger or somebody that knows you to do something to you.
Yeah.
And so I did find it, sort of alarming about the bikes it is a strong connection in this particular string of cases. I just think it's really weird that he has been unable to produce the bodies. It's just a really weird thing.
Yeah. I think his master plan is weird. I think the body's still being missing on all these cases. The one thing I would end with that, like, it does make me message him, and I have messaged him. I've not gotten responses. The one thing is him saying, I don't want to give up the body location because of another victim being nearby, like, makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up like it's the ring of truth.
Well, to me, it was just a flimsy excuse.
It could be.
Because you've admitted to murdering these children. What are you hiding? What do you not want them to find?
That's a great question.
I mean, his mother, maybe? I don't know. It just, I can't really put, but you know that their brains are skewed. The people that do things like that, their brains are skewed to not have a good perception of what they're seeing as shameful, right?
Yeah.
And so that's, it may be, I just can't imagine, like, it's just not a good enough excuse, in my opinion. It doesn't make any sense.
Special consideration was given to True Crime Excess by LabrottieCreations.com. If you have a moment in your favorite app, please go on and give us a review or a 5-star rating. It helps us get noticed in the crowd. This is True Crime XS.
You fall like the stars. I break things like guitars. Thick skin, no scars. We're in trouble, we took it too far. I don't want to go, but it's 'cause I'll disappoint ya. It's all I've ever dreamed of, something I cannot let go of. I hate the competition, this culture's like a gym, and I lost the motivation to get fit in your expectations.
True Crime Excess is brought to you by John and Meg. It's written, produced, edited, and posted by John and Meg. You can always support True Crime Excess through Patreon.com, or if you have a story you'd like them to cover, you can reach them at TrueCrimeAccess.com. Thank you for joining us.